They're faced with two options. Either improve society so that people can more broadly benefit, or shut down the conversation about how unfair things are. Because they're not going to address the oligarchical inequality about which the author is speaking, they have to address the other problem. People are beginning to recognize the oligarchical inequality. People are beginning to recognize that the media, state, and big business are operating a triumvirate of dominance to prevent conversation taking place. Therefore, in Canada and elsewhere in the world, you have to introduce censorship legislation. Otherwise, the power of the internet, the power that the internet always promised, could be realized. People all over the world could start communicating and saying, hang on a minute, could we organize society differently? What ideas have you got? How could we do things? Wait, cryptocurrencies, could that work? Solar energy. What about if we trade differently? Could we opt out of this? What if people stop paying tax? What if debt's cancelled at a personal level? All these ideas start to ferment and bubble up. And what happens? Who's challenged ultimately by that? They're faced with two options. Either improve.
Hold on, I'm a bit of an idiot. Couldn't figure out how to stop that loop. Yes, Russell Brand is amazing. He, I mean, I know him from a bunch of movies. I loved him in Get Him to the Greek. But he's amazing. But it's an amazing thing. In times of madness, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. I screwed up the expression. You know where I'm going with that. What Russell Brand is effectively summarizing there has been said by others throughout the course of human history. It's effectively what's in 1984, George Orwell's 1984. At some point, you don't know what to believe, and it doesn't matter. You just resign yourself to not knowing what to believe. And at some point, the government has so much control in what can be said, what can be published, what should be suppressed, that they could be telling you lies to your face and it won't make a difference because you won't know how much chocolate was produced last week, how many people perished in a certain incident of conflict. You just don't know. And Russell Brand, in that piece on Twitter that I clipped it from on his channel, is talking about, well, that was straight up Canadian, like it's never been Canadian before, talking about what's happening in Canada. You know, the government, which tried to rein in, call it the Wild West. Others might just call it freedom of expression of the interwebs, with their former Bill C-10, which ironically enough, the Minister of Heritage, what's his name? Stephen Guilbeault. Ironically enough, the individual who was talking about promoting this Bill C-10, which would regulate the internet the way the Canadian government currently regulates television and radio. I don't say this to make fun of him. I mean, people get arrested all the time. Stephen Guilbeault. I just say it's ironic that an individual who was an environmentalist, who was fighting government abuse, who got arrested because he believed so much in the cause of fighting government abuse, government overreach, is now the one who is behind the government abuse and the government overreach, promoting government abuse and government overreach, but under the guise of, we need to protect Canadian culture. We need to protect freedom of speech by suppressing freedom of speech. And in case anybody does not believe me, you know that you can trust the CBC, the state-funded CBC, when they run something that's somewhat against the interests of their employer. And yes, people, I'm calling the government of Canada the employer of the CBC because they pay them. And that's how it works. When someone pays you, when someone subsidizes your work, it's not that creative of an interpretation to say that they are their employer. This is CBC. What year is this from? October 27, 2021. New environment minister faces questions about past activism, says he has no secret agenda. Is this the one I'm talking about here? Okay, there he is. There's Minister Guilbeault. Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault, speaks with media following a cabinet meeting in October. Canada's new environment minister, this is former Minister of Heritage, the one promoting this Bill C-10, which sought to regulate internet, and as we later found out, social media accounts, the way the Broadcast Act or the Broadcasting Act governs radio and television. Yada, yada, yada. Let's just get... Guilbeault said the plan... Oh, he's an environmentalist. We know that. Where does it get to the part of him having been arrested? In 2001, Guilbeault was arrested after scaling Toronto's CN Tower to raise awareness of climate change. In 2002, he was involved in a Greenpeace stunt that saw activists climb onto the roof of then Alberta Premier Ralph Klein's house to install solar panels. Can you imagine? Can you just imagine if in today's day and age, any one of those trucker protesters had climbed onto Justin Trudeau's house to do anything, to install a Canadian flag? Can you imagine if any one of those protesters in Ottawa who sat there peacefully honking their horns for 3 weeks, had they climbed onto the roof of the house of Justin Trudeau or any liberal politician? Can you imagine what would have happened? You want to talk about protests that once upon a time, sure, it got him arrested. It also got him into government, Minister of Heritage. And I don't even necessarily judge negatively Guilbeault for having done it. He believed in it. He did a stunt, got arrested, and accepted his punishment, I presume. But he is now member of the government. Whereas if anybody today on the other side of the ideological spectrum had done anything remotely similar in scope and severity to this, can you imagine what Justin Trudeau would have done, what his police would do, what the what the court system would do to anybody who would dare climb on a politician's house today? They would say, yes, the environment is different. Back then, it was all peaceful, lovey-dovey, and no one cared. So this individual who was once arrested because he was protesting the government is now in the government and is now trying to say that the government that he once protested should have the power, the authority to govern social media accounts the way they govern the CBC, Radio-Canada. You know, the only difference, the big difference, at least they pay Radio-Canada and CBC for the honor of governing their content. At least Radio-Canada and CBC get paid by the government to be subject to the terms. They get subsidized. They stay in business. This law here, Bill C-10 and now the Bill C-11 that Rusty Rockets Russell Brand is talking about, is not talking about paying content creators. It's talking about suppressing the voices of content creators and tweaking the algorithm of search engines to falsify the results, to promote good content while suppressing bad content. You live long, what is it? You either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. So Rusty Rockets, Russell Brand, taking an interest in Canadian politics. I mean, and rightly so, because on the one hand, this is not just Canadian. This is becoming international. This is becoming a tendency throughout the world, one which George Orwell remarked upon when he wrote 1984 back in 1950, whatever, that the government is coming down to control everything right down to what you do in your own house. We're demonetized. Obviously, we're demonetized already because I showed a picture of members of our government. Request review. We're living in a world now where the government is micromanaging every aspect of citizen life, controlling what they do, who they see, what they wear, what they force their children to wear, what they do with their children, while simultaneously controlling or seeking to control the very information that they can absorb, and while simultaneously controlling the very information that they can express, and more so in Canada. You know, when you make laws like hate speech laws, which seem good at the time, and they're sold under the most clear-cut of pretexts. You can't have people wishing violence on identifiable groups of people. You can't have people wishing violence on any people. So you try to go out and pass hate speech laws because it's black and white when you put it out there, as if there weren't already laws to govern that anyhow. But what's his name? Oh, more laws, less justice. Tacitus, I believe. You pass these hate speech legislations, you expand on hate speech legislation, and you always sell it with the clear cut, you can't have people wishing violence on any individual, identifiable group of people who've been historically marginalized. And then lo and behold, one day in the not so distant future, criticizing the government is going to be deemed to be hate speech. People who criticize policy are going to be demonized, are going to be called extremist eccentrics. Whereas, criticizing the government itself becomes criminalized, where, what was it that Justin Trudeau said? Creating a sentiment that contradicts or undermines the authority of government. The government went from being a necessary evil, but the least amount possible of it, to being a parent that I never asked for, that I don't want, and that thinks it gets to micromanage citizen life the way an overbearing, abusive parent governs and rules over their children.